The house smelled of old wood, faded memories, and lavender polish. Eleanor Whitmore, 81 years old, stood in her living room surrounded by half-packed boxes. She stared at the floral wallpaper that had once been vibrant but was now yellowed with time. The realtor would arrive in a few hours to finalize the sale of the house. Her house. Her sanctuary for over 5 decades. But it wasn't just a house. It was the place where her happiest moments had bloomed and where her darkest secret had been buried. A secret she had carried for 60 years. From the doorway, a voice broke the heavy silence. "Mom." Eleanor turned sharply to see her daughter, Margaret, standing there, clutching her purse. Margaret was 57. Her face etched with lines of worry. The two women hadn't spoken much in recent years, their relationship strained and brittle like old paper. "I didn't think you'd come," Eleanor said quietly. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "I almost didn't." She looked around the room, taking in the disarray. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Selling this place can't be easy." Eleanor nodded but said nothing. How could she explain that packing up these walls meant unpacking decades of memories, including the one she'd spent a lifetime hiding? The year was 1963. Eleanor was 21, full of fire and dreams. The world smelled of rebellion and change. The Beatles were rising, civil rights marches filled the streets, and Eleanor felt like anything was possible. She worked at a small-town diner during the day and spent her nights scribbling poetry by lamplight, yearning to be a writer. And then there was Thomas Blake. Thomas was a traveling musician with a crooked smile and eyes that held mischief and promise. He wandered into the diner one sweltering July afternoon, ordered a cherry pie, and somehow never left Eleanor's mind. Their love was instant, fierce, and doomed from the start. Thomas dreamed of New York City and fame, while Eleanor's parents insisted she stay close to home and marry Henry Whitmore, a steady young man from a respectable family. But Eleanor didn't care about respectability. With Thomas, she felt alive. That summer, they met in secret under the old willow tree behind her parents' farm, whispering plans of running away together. And one warm August night, under a sky thick with stars, Eleanor gave him her heart completely. As Eleanor folded an old quilt into a box, Margaret picked up a photo from the mantel. It was of Eleanor and her late husband, Henry, on their wedding day. Henry's smile was wide, his suit perfectly pressed. Margaret sighed. "You and Dad looked so perfect together." Eleanor's hands stilled. "Appearances can be deceiving," she murmured, almost to herself. Margaret frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before Eleanor could answer, the doorbell rang. It was the realtor, a young man with a dazzling smile and a contract ready for signatures. Margaret excused herself to take a call, leaving Eleanor alone with the papers. Her hand trembled as she reached for the pen. Selling this house felt like erasing her past, but maybe, she thought, that was for the best. Then her eyes fell on the bottom shelf of an old bookcase. A small, dusty box sat there, one she hadn't touched in decades. Eleanor froze. She knew what was inside. A letter. A photograph. And the truth. Late August, 1963. Eleanor had made her decision. She was going to run away with Thomas. They planned to leave after dark, boarding a train to New York with nothing but a suitcase and their dreams. But that afternoon, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. The news sent her reeling. Thomas was overjoyed, promising to take care of her and their baby. But Eleanor's parents found out before she could leave. Her father's face turned crimson with rage. "You will not throw your life away for that drifter," he bellowed. Her mother wept, begging her to stay and marry Henry, the dependable young man who had always admired Eleanor from afar. In the chaos, Thomas was confronted by Eleanor's father and brothers. There was shouting, shoving, and then Thomas was gone. Eleanor never saw him again. 2 weeks later, under family pressure and with nowhere else to turn, Eleanor married Henry. She named her newborn daughter Margaret. Henry raised Margaret as his own, never knowing the truth. Margaret returned to the living room just as Eleanor was clutching the small dusty box to her chest. "What's that?" Margaret asked, suspicion lacing her voice. Eleanor swallowed hard. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Margaret's brow furrowed. "Mom, you're scaring me." Eleanor opened the box. Inside was a faded photograph of a young man with a crooked smile, Thomas. Beneath it, a letter written in Eleanor's delicate handwriting. My dearest Thomas. Margaret's eyes widened. Who is he? Eleanor's voice broke. He was the man I loved before your father. The man I planned to spend my life with. Margaret staggered back. Are you saying? Eleanor nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Thomas is your biological father. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Margaret's face twisted with disbelief and betrayal. All these years. You let me think Dad was my real father? Eleanor sobbed. I wanted to tell you. I tried so many times, but Henry loved you as his own. And after Thomas disappeared, it felt too late. Margaret turned away, shaking. You lied to me. My whole life has been a lie. Eleanor had waited for Thomas. Weeks turned to months, and still, no word. She wrote him countless letters, pouring out her heart, but none were ever answered. It wasn't until years later that she learned the truth. Thomas had died in a car accident the very night they were supposed to run away. Her father had known but kept it from her, believing he was protecting her future. By the time Eleanor discovered this, she was already deeply rooted in her marriage to Henry. The willow tree behind the farm became a place she visited alone, whispering her secrets to the wind. Margaret's anger boiled over. So all this time, you let me believe a lie. You let me grieve Dad without ever knowing who I really am. Eleanor reached for her daughter's hand. There's more, she said softly. Margaret hesitated. Eleanor handed her a folded piece of paper. This is Thomas's last letter to me. Your grandfather intercepted it and hid it from me. Margaret unfolded the brittle page and read aloud. My darling Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it to you in time. If anything happens to me, promise me you'll tell our child who I was. I want them to know they were loved before they were even born. Margaret's tears fell freely. He wanted to be part of my life. Eleanor wept openly now. Yes, and I failed him. And I failed you. Hours later, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light through the dusty windows. Margaret sat beside her mother, the letter clutched to her chest. For the first time in years, they simply sat together in silence. Finally, Margaret spoke. Mom, I don't know if I can forgive you. Not yet. But I don't want to lose you too. Eleanor squeezed her hand. That's all I can ask. The house on Willow Lane would soon belong to someone else. But as they left that night, Eleanor realized that some walls don't need to be torn down for healing to begin. A month later, Margaret returned to the old willow tree with her own daughter. She told her the story Eleanor had kept hidden for so long. As the leaves rustled above them, Margaret whispered, sometimes the past hurts, but it also teaches us who we are. The little girl hugged her tightly, and for the first time in decades, the wind carried not a secret, but a promise of forgiveness and new beginnings. The old house had been sold, but the memories still clung to Eleanor like a second skin. She moved into a small assisted living apartment on the edge of town, its walls bare and silent compared to the vibrant chaos of Willow Lane. Margaret visited often, though their conversations remained tender and careful, like walking across cracked ice. Forgiveness was not a single moment. It was a long, uneven journey. And for Margaret, discovering the truth about her father was only the beginning of a storm that would reshape her life. Margaret had always believed she knew where she came from. Her late father, Henry Whitmore, had been a hard-working man who built a small auto repair business from nothing. He wasn't rich, but he provided for his family with honesty and grit. Margaret had inherited that same work ethic. For 20 years, she had worked her way up in a local accounting firm, eventually becoming a senior manager. But her life felt predictable, safe. After learning about Thomas, her biological father, a fire lit inside her. She began to see her career, her ambitions, and her identity through a new lens. What would Thomas have wanted for her? Would he have encouraged her to stay small and safe? Or to take risks and build something of her own? One night, as she sifted through the dusty box Eleanor had given her, she found a detail she'd missed before. A business card, yellowed with age, tucked behind Thomas's final letter. It read, Thomas Blake and Company. Live music, event planning, community festivals. In faded ink, there was a handwritten note. Dream big. Build bigger. Margaret sat with the card in her hand, heart pounding. Thomas hadn't just been a musician. He had been an entrepreneur, a man who built something from scratch, just like Henry, but in a completely different way. That night, she couldn't sleep. By morning, Margaret made a decision. She would honor both men who had shaped her life, one by blood, the other by love, by building something bold of her own. Margaret quit her job. It shocked her colleagues. Some called her brave. Others called her foolish. Her boss, in a tone dripping with condescension, said, "Margaret, at your age, stability is more important than chasing dreams. You're throwing away a solid career." But Margaret had run numbers her entire life. For the first time, she was ready to take a calculated risk on herself. With her savings and a small inheritance Henry had left behind, she opened the Willow Group, a financial consulting firm aimed at helping small businesses thrive. Her first clients were modest: a family-owned bakery, a mechanic shop, and a local bookstore. Margaret worked tirelessly, not just crunching numbers but teaching these owners how to read financial statements, manage cash flow, and plan for growth. Each success story fueled her drive. She quickly learned that money wasn't the biggest challenge for these businesses. Most owners were passionate about their craft but terrified of numbers, taxes, and scaling up. Margaret became not just a consultant, but a mentor, much like the mentor she wished she'd had early in her career. Still, the early days were brutal. There were months when bills piled high, when she questioned if she'd made a colossal mistake. But every time doubt crept in, she thought of Thomas's words, "Dream big, build bigger." Meanwhile, Eleanor struggled with her own transformation. Moving into assisted living had felt like a defeat, but it gave her something she hadn't had in years: time to reflect. She began writing again. At first, just short journal entries, then stories, and eventually, chapters of a memoir she titled The Willow Tree Secrets. For decades, she had carried her pain in silence. Now she poured it onto the page. Her forbidden love with Thomas, the betrayal of her father, the joy and grief of raising Margaret. Eleanor hoped that by sharing her truth, she could help other women, especially those who had sacrificed their dreams for family or societal expectations. Margaret encouraged her mother's writing, even helping Eleanor format the manuscript for potential publishers. Through this process, they grew closer, their shared project becoming a bridge between past and present. One evening, Margaret told Eleanor about her business struggles. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes as she said, "My darling, I spent my whole life letting others decide my path. Promise me you'll never let fear steal your future. Your father Thomas, he would have wanted you to fly." For the first time, Margaret truly understood her mother's regret and her courage. As the Willow Group gained traction, Margaret faced a pivotal challenge: scaling her business beyond one-on-one consulting. She realized that if she wanted to make a lasting impact, she needed to build systems and teams, not just trade hours for dollars. She hired 2 young consultants, both recent college graduates eager to learn. She invested in marketing, building a simple website and starting a YouTube channel where she shared financial tips for small businesses. To her surprise, the channel gained traction quickly. Viewers connected with her authenticity and practical advice. Margaret ended each video with a heartfelt message. If you're a dreamer, a builder, or someone fighting to keep your business alive, this channel is for you. Subscribe for more stories and strategies that will help you grow, not just in business, but in life. The comment section overflowed with gratitude. Business owners from across the country shared their struggles and victories, forming a virtual community of support. It was then that Margaret understood her true calling: to empower others to take control of their financial destinies, just as she had taken control of hers. One Saturday, Margaret's teenage daughter, Lily, visited Eleanor at the assisted living home. Lily had been listening quietly as her mother and grandmother spoke about the Willow Group's growth. Finally, she said, "Mom, maybe we could do a series about Grandma's stories on your YouTube channel. Like, lessons from her life mixed with business tips." Eleanor laughed softly. "Oh, darling, who would want to hear an old woman's ramblings?" Margaret shook her head. "Mom, people crave stories. Numbers tell you where you are. Stories tell you why it matters." Inspired by Lily's idea, they launched a special video series called Lessons from the Willow Tree. Each episode blended Eleanor's life lessons with Margaret's financial expertise. For example, Eleanor would recount the hardships of running a household on a shoestring budget during the 1960s. Margaret would then connect those experiences to modern-day strategies for cash flow management and frugal growth. The series went viral. Subscribers poured in, moved by the raw honesty and practical wisdom. Soon, the Willow Group wasn't just a consulting firm. It became a movement, a place where small business owners felt seen, heard, and equipped to thrive. Months later, while organizing Eleanor's memoir drafts, Margaret stumbled upon a document she didn't recognize. It was a business proposal from decades earlier, handwritten by Thomas. The proposal outlined a vision for a community arts center that would provide music lessons, small business workshops, and networking events for local entrepreneurs. Thomas had planned to launch it before his untimely death. Margaret's heart raced as she read his words. Thomas hadn't just been a dreamer, he had been a builder, like her. That night, she shared the proposal with Eleanor. Tears filled her mother's eyes. Oh, Margaret. He wanted to create something lasting. Something beautiful. Margaret knew what she had to do. With Eleanor's blessing, she decided to bring Thomas's dream to life. Using profits from the Willow Group and donations from her growing online community, Margaret purchased an abandoned building in their hometown. After months of renovation, it opened as the Blake Center for Community Growth, named in honor of the father Margaret never knew. The center offered free business workshops for aspiring entrepreneurs, music and art programs for underprivileged youth, networking events that connected dreamers with mentors and investors. On opening day, Eleanor stood beside Margaret, her hands trembling as she cut the ribbon. "This," Eleanor whispered, "is what healing looks like." As the sun set behind the newly opened Blake Center, Margaret addressed the crowd. "When I first started the Willow Group," she said, her voice steady but emotional, "I thought I was building a business. But what I was really building was a bridge between past and future." She paused, scanning the crowd of small business owners, students, and families. "My father, Thomas Blake, never got to see his dream come true. But today, through all of you, his vision lives on." The audience erupted in applause, but Margaret wasn't finished. "If you've ever felt like your dream was too small, or that your mistakes defined you, I want you to remember this moment. Your story matters. Your business matters. And you matter." Then, with a warm smile, she concluded, "If this story touched you, please subscribe to our channel. Join our community of dreamers and doers. Together, we'll keep building one story, one lesson, and one dream at a time." In the weeks that followed, Eleanor's health began to decline. She passed peacefully one crisp autumn morning, surrounded by Margaret, Lily, and the great-granddaughter she'd always wanted to meet. At Eleanor's funeral, Margaret read an excerpt from the Willow Tree Secrets, which had been published just weeks earlier. "Our lives are like houses. Some walls crumble. Some stand strong. But the most important thing is not the house itself, it's the love we build inside." Years later, the Blake Center became a beacon for entrepreneurs across the region. Margaret's YouTube channel surpassed 1 million subscribers, empowering small business owners worldwide. Lily, now an adult, joined the family business, bringing fresh ideas and a passion for digital storytelling. And on the old willow tree behind the Blake Center, a plaque read, "Planted by Thomas Blake. Nurtured by Eleanor Whitmore. Grown by Margaret and Lily. For dreamers everywhere." The wind rustled through the branches, carrying not secrets this time, but hope and a promise that no dream would ever be buried again.